The coffee mug slipped from my hands, shattering against the kitchen tiles, as I stared at the official letterhead through my front window. The caseworker's sedan sat in my driveway like a vulture, its government plates gleaming under the harsh October sun. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched the woman in the navy blazer flip through her clipboard, her expression stern and businesslike. This was the third visit in 2 months. The knock came sharp and authoritative, echoing through my modest ranch home on Maple Street. I smoothed my cardigan with trembling hands, stepping carefully around the broken ceramic pieces. At 59, I'd raised 4 children successfully, helped raise 6 grandchildren, and never once had anyone question my parenting abilities. Yet here I stood, opening my door to another social services investigation. Before we dive into this unbelievable tale, please like and subscribe. I read every comment, so tell me where you're from. Mrs. Butler? The caseworker's voice was clipped, professional. I'm here regarding another report filed about the welfare of the minor children in your care. My name is Dorothy Butler. I'm 59 years old, and I never imagined I'd be defending myself against accusations of neglect and endangerment. The children in question are my twin grandsons, 8-year-old Jake and Mason, who've lived with me since their mother, my daughter Sarah, deployed overseas with the National Guard 6 months ago. What kind of report this time? I asked, though my stomach already knew the answer would be as fabricated as the previous ones. The caseworker consulted her notes, her pen clicking nervously. Allegations of leaving minors unsupervised for extended periods, failure to provide adequate meals, and possible substance abuse in the household. She looked up, studying my face for reactions. The caller was quite specific about times and dates. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. The lies were becoming more elaborate, more detailed, and more vicious with each report. Someone was watching our daily routine carefully enough to twist innocent moments into damaging accusations. When I'd stepped outside to bring in groceries while the boys finished their homework, someone had reported them as abandoned. When I'd served them cereal for breakfast during a particularly hectic morning, it became failure to provide adequate nutrition. May I come in to observe the living conditions? The caseworker asked, though we both knew it wasn't really a question. As she conducted her inspection, photographing the boys' neat bedroom, the well-stocked refrigerator, and the homework station I'd set up in the living room, my mind raced through the possibilities. Who was doing this to us? Who watched our house with such malicious attention? The boys arrived home from school just as the caseworker was finishing her notes. Jake's backpack dragged behind him, grass stains decorating his knees from recess soccer, while Mason clutched a spelling test marked with a bright red A+ in his small fist. Grandma Dorothy, why is that lady taking pictures of our room? Mason whispered, pressing close to my side. I wrapped my arm around him, feeling his thin shoulders tense with confusion. Just some paperwork, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about. But Jake, always the more perceptive twin, frowned as he watched the caseworker pack up her camera. Is this about Mrs. Henderson again? She was staring at our house from her window when we got off the bus. A chill ran down my spine. Margaret Henderson lived in the blue Colonial directly across the street, and I'd noticed her increased attention to our daily activities over the past few months. She'd moved in last spring, a bitter woman in her mid-60s who complained about everything from our lawn height to the boys' outdoor play volume. After the caseworker left with promises to file her report within 48 hours, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by the evidence of our normal, loving life. School permission slips waited for signatures. Healthy snacks were portioned in small containers for tomorrow's lunches, and the boys' laughter drifted from the living room where they built elaborate Lego structures. My phone buzzed with a text from my son, Michael Butler, the boy's uncle who worked as a shift supervisor at the local manufacturing plant. "Mom, can you call me when you get a chance? Heard there was another visit today. I'm worried about you and the boys." At 34, Michael had inherited his late father's steady presence and protective instincts. He lived 20 minutes away in the next town over, but checked on us constantly, helping with everything from soccer practice transportation to bedtime stories when work kept him late. The boys adored their Uncle Mike, and his support had been crucial during these frightening months of false accusations. Before I could call him back, my front door opened with the familiar jingle of keys. "Dorothy, it's me." The warm voice of Linda Morrison filled my hallway, accompanied by the rustle of grocery bags and the soft click of sensible shoes against hardwood. Linda had been my neighbor and closest friend for over 15 years, living in the White Cape Cod, 2 houses down. A retired nurse with silver hair, always perfectly styled, and laugh lines that spoke of decades spent caring for others, she'd become my anchor during this nightmare. At 62, she had the energy of someone half her age and the wisdom to match her years. "I brought dinner," she announced, bustling into my kitchen with her arms full of containers from the local deli. "And before you argue, you look like you haven't eaten a proper meal in days." I watched her unpack sandwiches, homemade soup, and fresh fruit, her movements efficient and nurturing. Linda had been present for every caseworker visit, taking detailed notes and photographs of her own to document the truth of our situation. "Boys," she called cheerfully, "come see what Mrs. Linda brought for dinner." Jake and Mason thundered into the kitchen, their earlier worry forgotten in the excitement of Linda's surprise visit. She had a gift for making even the darkest days feel manageable, her presence filling our house with warmth and normalcy. "Did the caseworker find anything concerning this time?" Linda asked quietly while the boys examined their sandwiches. I shook my head, frustration and exhaustion weighing heavily on my shoulders. "Same result as always. Clean house, happy children, no evidence of any wrongdoing. But she'll be back, because whoever is making these calls isn't planning to stop." Linda's expression hardened, her nursing background making her particularly protective of children and their well-being. "This harassment has to end, Dorothy. Those boys shouldn't have to live under this constant scrutiny, and you shouldn't have to defend yourself against lies." As we prepared dinner together, the familiar routine of setting the table and warming soup providing comfort against the day's stress, I found myself studying the view from my kitchen window. Margaret Henderson's house stood directly across the street, its windows like watching eyes. The perfectly manicured lawn, a stark contrast to our more lived-in yard where the boys played daily. Had Jake been right about her watching us? The timing of each report seemed too coincidental, too precisely aligned with moments that could be misinterpreted by someone observing from a distance without context. Michael arrived just as we were finishing dinner, his work clothes still dusty from the factory floor, concern etched across his features. He hugged both boys tightly before pulling me aside for a quiet conversation. "This can't continue, Mom," he said, his voice low but determined. "Every report they file creates a paper trail, even when they find nothing wrong. Eventually, someone's going to decide that where there's smoke, there must be fire." His words echoed my own fears. How many false accusations could we weather before the system decided the problem wasn't the reports, but our family itself? That evening, after Michael had helped the boys with their bath and Linda had loaded our dishwasher with characteristic efficiency, I stood at my living room window watching Margaret Henderson's house. A light glowed in her front room, and I could see the silhouette of someone positioned near the window, looking directly toward our home. The pieces were beginning to form a picture I didn't want to acknowledge, but the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. The trap I'd missed finally sprang shut. The realization hit me like a physical blow as I watched that silhouette in Margaret's window. The timing, the specificity of the reports, the way she always seemed to be positioned at her front window whenever something happened in our yard, it all pointed to one uncomfortable truth. I stepped back from my own window, my heart racing. Jake bounded into the living room, his hair still damp from his bath, carrying his favorite book about dinosaurs. "Will you read to us tonight?" he asked, climbing onto the couch and patting the cushion beside him. "Of course, sweetheart." I settled next to him, grateful for the distraction, but my mind kept wandering to that figure across the street. Tommy joined us moments later, snuggling against my other side, and for a few precious minutes, reading about prehistoric creatures. I could almost forget the stress that had become our constant companion. After tucking the boys into bed, I found Linda in the kitchen, wiping down counters that were already spotless, her way of processing worry I'd learned over the years. "You've figured out who's been making the calls, haven't you?" Linda asked without looking up from her methodical cleaning. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, suddenly feeling every bit of my exhaustion. "I think so." But knowing and proving are two different things entirely. Linda set down her cloth and joined me at the table, her nurse's instincts reading the tension in my posture. "Talk to me. What did you notice?" "Margaret Henderson. She's always at that front window, Linda, always watching. And every single report has come after something that could look questionable if you didn't understand the context." I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. "Like yesterday, when Tommy fell off his bike and was crying. To someone watching from across the street, it might have looked like I was being rough with him when I was actually checking for injuries." Linda nodded slowly, her expression growing more serious. "That would explain the timing. But Dorothy, this puts you in a difficult position. She's not technically doing anything illegal by watching from her own window." The next morning brought another challenge I hadn't anticipated. Jake came downstairs for breakfast moving differently, favoring his left leg slightly. "What happened, buddy?" I asked, kneeling to examine his leg. There was a small bruise on his shin, probably from playground activities the day before. "I bumped it on the jungle gym yesterday," he said matter-of-factly, completely unbothered by the minor injury. "It doesn't really hurt anymore." But as I looked at that small bruise, my stomach dropped. In the current climate of scrutiny, even the most innocent childhood injury felt like potential ammunition. I found myself taking photos with my phone, documenting the minor bruise and Jake's explanation, feeling sick that our life had come to this level of defensive preparation. Tommy wandered into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and immediately noticed my worried expression. "Are we in trouble again?" he asked, his 6-year-old voice carrying a weight that no child should have to bear. "No, sweetheart, we're not in any trouble at all." I pulled him into a hug, but internally I was furious that my children had learned to associate worry on my face with the threat of official scrutiny. Linda arrived just as I was walking the boys to the school bus stop, timing I was grateful for since I'd been dreading making that short journey alone. As we stood waiting with Jake and Tommy, chatting about their plans for the day, I caught sight of Margaret Henderson's front curtain moving slightly. "She's watching right now, isn't she?" Linda murmured, following my gaze. "She always is." The school bus rounded the corner, its yellow bulk a welcome sight. I hugged both boys goodbye, making sure to smile and keep everything normal for their sake. After the bus pulled away, Linda and I walked back toward the house in silence. But as we reached my front steps, Linda stopped abruptly. "Dorothy, look at your mailbox. I turned to see a white envelope tucked under the mailbox flag. No postal markings, just my name written in careful script across the front. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, Linda reading over my shoulder. The note was brief but chilling. Your children deserve better than a mother who can't properly supervise them. This neighborhood deserves better than your family. It wasn't signed, but something about the precise handwriting and the phrasing made my suspicions crystallize into certainty. Linda, I can't keep living like this, I said, my voice shaking as I crumpled the note. Every morning I wake up wondering what she's going to find fault with today. Every bruise on my kids feels like evidence against me. This is insane. Linda gently took the note from my hands, smoothing it out on the kitchen table. Dorothy, this crosses a line. This isn't just reporting things she thinks she sees anymore. This is harassment. I sank into a chair, feeling the weight of weeks of constant vigilance. But what can I do? If I confront her directly, she'll just say I'm being aggressive. If I ignore it, it continues. I feel trapped. You're not trapped. You're just being careful, which is smart. Linda sat across from me, her expression thoughtful. But maybe it's time to stop being purely defensive. The morning passed quietly, but I found myself checking the windows obsessively, watching Margaret's house. Around noon, I saw her emerge with a small notebook, walking slowly along the sidewalk between our properties. She paused near my fence, appearing to examine something, then made notes. She's out there writing things down, I called to Linda, who was helping me organize some paperwork in the living room. Linda joined me at the window. What could she possibly be documenting now? Your grass height? As if she heard us, Margaret looked directly toward my window. For a moment, our eyes met across the distance. Instead of looking away embarrassed, she stared back with a coldness that made my skin crawl. Then she deliberately wrote something else in her notebook before walking back to her house. Did you see that? I whispered, though there was no logical reason to whisper. She wanted me to see her writing about something. Linda was quiet for a long moment, watching Margaret disappear into her house. Dorothy, I think we need to accept that this isn't going to stop on its own. She's escalating. That afternoon, when Jake and Tommy came home from school, I tried to maintain normalcy, but I could feel the tension in my shoulders. Jake immediately noticed. Mom, you look worried again, he said, dropping his backpack by the door. Is it because of the mean lady next door? The fact that my 8-year-old had identified Margaret as the mean lady without any prompting from me was both validating and heartbreaking. These children were living with this stress too. What makes you call her the mean lady, Jake? I asked carefully. She always stares at us when we're playing outside. And yesterday, when Tommy's ball went near her fence, she came out and yelled at him to stay away from her property. Tommy wasn't even touching her fence. Tommy nodded vigorously. She was really mad, Mom. I was scared. Linda, who had stayed through the afternoon, knelt down to Tommy's level. You don't have to be scared, sweetheart. You weren't doing anything wrong. But why is she so angry at us all the time? Tommy asked, his 6-year-old logic struggling with the situation. Before I could answer, there was a sharp knock at the front door. Through the peephole, I could see a familiar figure in a uniform. My stomach dropped. It's another visit, I said quietly to Linda, who immediately understood. Boys, why don't you go start your homework in the kitchen? Linda suggested. Your mom needs to talk to someone at the door. As I opened the door, the caseworker looked almost apologetic. Ms. Dorothy, I'm sorry to bother you again. We received another report, and I'm required to follow up. What is it this time? I asked, trying to keep the exhaustion out of my voice. A report that your children were left unsupervised in the yard for extended periods yesterday, and that one of them appeared injured at the school bus stop this morning. I closed my eyes briefly. Margaret had been busy. I stepped back to let the caseworker inside, feeling Linda move protectively closer behind me. The children were never unsupervised, I said firmly. I was watching them from inside the house while I prepared dinner, and neither of my boys was injured this morning. I understand your frustration, Ms. Dorothy, the caseworker said, pulling out her clipboard. But I do need to document the current condition of the children and verify their well-being. Jake appeared in the kitchen doorway, having obviously overheard despite our attempts at privacy. Mom, are we in trouble again? The caseworker looked at Jake with a professional smile. No one's in trouble, young man. I just need to ask you and your brother a few questions. Is that okay? Tommy peeked around Jake's shoulder, his eyes wide. Are you here because the mean lady said something bad about us again? The directness of my 6-year-old's question hung in the air. The caseworker glanced at me, then back at Tommy. What makes you think someone said something bad about you, Tommy? Because she watches us all the time and writes stuff down, Tommy said matter-of-factly. And then people come to our house asking if we're okay. But we're always okay. Jake nodded seriously. Yesterday, I was watching Tommy play in the yard from the window, just like Mom does. The mean lady came out and stared at our house for a really long time. Then she wrote something in her book. Boys? I started, but the caseworker held up a gentle hand. It's all right. Sometimes children notice things adults miss. She knelt down to Tommy's level. Tommy, you mentioned someone said you were hurt this morning. Do you remember falling or getting hurt at the bus stop? Tommy shook his head vigorously. No, I didn't get hurt. I was wearing my new superhero Band-Aid on my knee, but that's from when I fell off my bike on Sunday. Mom always puts cool Band-Aids on our scratches. Can you show me the Band-Aid? The caseworker asked. Tommy rolled up his jeans to reveal a small, nearly healed scrape with a Batman Band-Aid covering it. See? It's almost all better. Mom says Band-Aids help things heal faster. Linda stepped forward slightly. I was here on Sunday when that happened. Tommy was learning to ride without training wheels in the driveway. It was a perfectly normal childhood accident. The caseworker made notes, then looked at Jake. And Jake, when your mom watches you from inside, can you always see her? Yeah, she usually stands right at that window. Jake pointed toward the living room. Sometimes she comes outside to check on us, but she's always watching. That's what moms do. And how do you feel about your mom watching you play? Jake looked puzzled by the question. Good, I guess. I mean, that's how I know I'm safe. And if Tommy gets scared or needs help, Mom's right there. Tommy nodded enthusiastically. And when Jake was teaching me to catch the baseball yesterday, Mom brought us snacks and made sure I was holding my glove right. The caseworker's expression softened as she listened to my children's earnest responses. She stood up and made a few more notes. Boys, thank you for talking with me. You can go finish your homework now. After Jake and Tommy disappeared back into the kitchen, the caseworker turned to me. Ms. Dorothy, I have to ask directly. Have you had any interactions with your neighbor Margaret recently that might explain the timing of these reports? Linda and I exchanged glances. Actually, yes, I said. She's been increasingly hostile, and today she made a point of letting me see her writing in a notebook while staring directly at my house. The reports we've been receiving are very specific, the caseworker said carefully. They include details about timing, locations, and alleged incidents that would require direct observation of your family's activities. You mean someone would have to be watching us constantly to make those kinds of reports? Linda said, her voice tight with controlled anger. I can't discuss the specifics of who makes reports, but I can say that when we receive multiple reports with very detailed information, we look for patterns. The caseworker closed her notebook. Your children are clearly well cared for, Ms. Dorothy. They're articulate, healthy, and obviously feel safe and loved. I felt a wave of relief, but it was quickly followed by frustration. So what happens now? Do these calls just continue indefinitely? I'm required to respond to every report we receive, the caseworker said sympathetically. But I'm also required to document when reports appear to be unfounded. That documentation builds a record too. After she left, Linda and I sat at the kitchen table while the boys worked on their homework. Jake looked up from his math worksheet. Mom, is the mean lady going to keep trying to get us in trouble? The question broke my heart because I didn't have an answer that would make him feel completely safe. Jake, sometimes adults don't handle their feelings very well, and they make choices that affect other people. Like when Tommy gets mad and throws his toys, but bigger? Jake asked. Something like that, I said, surprised by his insight. Tommy looked up from his coloring. But throwing toys is mean. Why doesn't someone tell the mean lady to stop being mean to us? Linda reached over and ruffled Tommy's hair. You know what, Tommy? That's exactly what we're going to figure out how to do. As evening approached and Linda prepared to leave, she pulled me aside. Dorothy, we need to start documenting everything. Every time Margaret watches you, every interaction, every visit from social services. We need our own record. You really think this is going to get worse before it gets better? Linda looked toward Margaret's house, where lights were on in what appeared to be a front room with a clear view of our property. I think Margaret has made this her mission, and people with missions don't usually give up easily. As if summoned by our conversation, Margaret appeared at her front window, visible in the lamplight. She stood there for a long moment, looking directly at our house before stepping back into the shadows. She's watching us right now, isn't she? I said without looking. Yes, Linda replied quietly. And tomorrow, I guarantee you'll hear about our suspicious evening meeting in your front yard. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every small sound outside made me wonder if Margaret was out there, documenting some new perceived violation of proper parenting. I found myself getting up twice to check that the boys' bedroom door was properly closed, that no lights were visible from outside that might suggest they were up past bedtime. The next morning brought a new challenge I hadn't anticipated. Jake came down to breakfast moving slowly, his usual morning energy notably absent. My tummy hurts, he said, slumping into his chair. I knelt beside him, feeling his forehead. No fever, but his face was pale. What kind of hurt, buddy? Like you need to throw up? Or like butterflies? Like butterflies, but mean butterflies, Jake said, wrapping his arms around his middle. What if the social services lady comes back today and I say something wrong? Tommy looked up from his cereal, milk dripping from his spoon. Yeah, what if she asked me about the time you got really mad at us for making the fort in the living room? My heart sank. Both boys were carrying stress I hadn't fully recognized, and now it was affecting them physically. Jake, Tommy, come sit with me on the couch for a minute. We settled together, Tommy climbing into my lap while Jake pressed against my side. First, the social services lady isn't coming back today. She was here yesterday, and she saw that you're both healthy and happy. But she might come back tomorrow, Jake said quietly. Or next week? Maybe, I admitted, because lying to them wouldn't help. But here's what I need you both to understand. You have never, ever done anything wrong. When I got mad about the living room fort, that was normal mom stuff. All moms sometimes get frustrated when their kids make big messes. Tommy tilted his head back to look at me. But what if I tell her about that time you cried in the kitchen? I felt my chest tighten. There had been an evening a few weeks back when everything felt overwhelming, and I'd had a brief cry while making dinner. I thought the boys hadn't noticed. Tommy, it's okay for moms to cry sometimes. It doesn't mean anything bad about our family. But Margaret doesn't like us, Jake said. And she keeps telling lies about us. Why can't we tell lies about her? The question caught me off guard with its simple logic. Because, Jake, telling lies doesn't make things better. It just makes more problems. And we don't want to become the kind of people who hurt others just because they hurt us. That's hard, Jake said with a sigh that seemed too old for his 7 years. It is hard, I agreed, but that's how we know it's the right thing to do. After I dropped the boys at school, I found myself driving past Linda's office instead of heading straight home. I needed to talk to someone who understood the situation, and Linda had become my anchor in this storm. I found her in the break room, stirring sugar into her coffee. When she saw me, her expression immediately shifted to concern. Dorothy, what's wrong? You look like you didn't sleep. I didn't, not much. I accepted the cup of coffee she poured for me and sank into one of the plastic chairs. Linda, the boys are starting to internalize this stress. Jake had a stomachache this morning, and they're both worried about saying the wrong thing if the caseworker comes back. Linda sat across from me, her face serious. That's exactly what I was afraid of. When adults have conflicts, kids always think it's somehow their fault, or their responsibility to fix it. Tommy asked why we can't tell lies about Margaret the way she tells lies about us. I rubbed my temples where a headache was building. And honestly, Linda, for just a second, I understood the appeal of fighting fire with fire. But you won't, Linda said with certainty. No, I won't. But I also can't keep living like this, constantly looking over my shoulder, constantly worried that some normal parenting moment is going to be twisted into evidence of neglect or abuse. I took a shaky sip of coffee. What if she escalates? What if the false reports become more serious? Linda was quiet for a moment, and I could see her thinking. Dorothy, I've been wondering about something. Has Margaret ever tried to talk to you directly about whatever her actual problem is? No, never. She just stares and watches, and apparently reports. I thought back through months of interactions, or lack thereof. The only time she's spoken to me was that first week after we moved in, when she came over to tell me about the neighborhood's standards. What exactly did she say? Something about how the previous family had been very quiet and well-behaved, and how she hoped we would maintain the neighborhood's reputation. I could still recall the tightness in Margaret's voice, the way she'd looked past me into the house as if cataloging what she saw. She made it clear she expected the boys to be basically invisible. Linda leaned forward. Dorothy, what if this isn't really about your parenting at all? What if Margaret simply doesn't want children in the neighborhood, period? The possibility hit me like a revelation. You think she's trying to drive us out? I think Margaret might believe that if she makes life difficult enough, you'll decide to move somewhere more family-friendly. Linda's voice carried a note of anger. Which would be completely wrong, but it would explain why nothing you do seems to matter. You could be the perfect parent, and she'd still find fault. So what do I do with that information? You stop trying to prove you're a good mother, Linda said firmly. Because that was never really the question. I sat with Linda's words echoing in my mind long after she'd gone home. The afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the table where Tommy was working on his math homework. Jake sat nearby, quietly coloring, but I noticed how both boys kept glancing toward the front window whenever they heard a sound outside. "Mom?" Tommy looked up from his worksheet, pencil hovering uncertainly. "Is it bad that we play in the backyard?" My heart clenched. "No, sweetheart. Playing outside is exactly what kids should do." "But what if we're too loud?" His voice was smaller than usual, and I could see the worry lines forming around his 8-year-old eyes. "What if the lady calls the people again?" I set down my coffee mug and moved to sit beside him. The kitchen felt too quiet, filled with the kind of careful silence we'd all started adopting without realizing it. Even Jake had stopped his usual chatter, his crayons moving more deliberately across the paper, as if making too much noise while coloring might somehow be held against us. "Tommy, I need you to listen to me very carefully," I said, choosing my words with the precision of someone who'd spent weeks walking on eggshells. "You and Jake are not doing anything wrong. Playing, laughing, being kids, those are all good things. The problem isn't with you." Jake looked up from his coloring book, a streak of blue crayon on his cheek. "Then why does the mean lady watch us?" I glanced toward the window facing Margaret's house, where I could see her familiar silhouette behind her sheer curtains. She was there so often now that her presence had become as constant as the oak tree in our front yard. The boys had started noticing too, the way her figure would appear whenever we came or went, whenever they played outside, whenever we simply existed in our own space. "Some people have forgotten how to be happy," I said finally. "And sometimes when people aren't happy, they try to make others unhappy too." Tommy nodded solemnly, but I could see he was still carrying the weight of adult problems on his young shoulders. The stomach aches had continued, and yesterday he'd asked if we were going to have to move again. The question had hit me like a physical blow. The realization that my children were living with the same constant anxiety that had been eating away at me for months. "Can we go play outside?" Jake asked, but his usual enthusiasm was tempered by something that looked too much like caution for a 5-year-old. I looked toward the backyard, then back at my boys. Linda's words came back to me. "Stop trying to prove you're a good mother." The afternoon was beautiful, warm and clear, perfect for running around and being children. My sons deserved to play without fear, to laugh without worrying about who might be listening. "Yes," I said, standing up with sudden determination. "Let's all go outside." But as we headed toward the back door, I caught sight of Margaret moving from her kitchen window to her back porch, positioning herself with a clear view of our yard. Her notebook was already in her hand, pen poised like a weapon. The sight sent a chill through me, and I realized that Linda might be right about Margaret's motivations, but knowing the truth didn't make living with it any easier. Tommy noticed my hesitation and slipped his hand into mine. "It's okay, Mom," he said quietly. "We'll be really good." The fact that my 8-year-old was trying to comfort me while promising to be really good just for playing outside made something inside me snap. That simple statement from Tommy broke something loose inside me, and I felt a surge of protective anger that was cleaner and more focused than anything I'd experienced in months. My 8-year-old shouldn't have to promise to be really good just to play in his own backyard. "You know what?" I said, squeezing Tommy's hand and looking down at both my boys. "You don't need to be really good. You need to be yourselves. You need to play and laugh and be kids, because that's exactly what you're supposed to do." I opened the back door with more force than necessary, and we stepped out into the afternoon sunshine. Margaret was indeed positioned on her back porch, her notebook ready, watching us with the intensity of someone conducting surveillance. For the first time in months, instead of that familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach, I felt something closer to resolve. "Go play," I told the boys, settling into one of our patio chairs where I had a clear view of both my children and Margaret. Jake ran immediately to his sandbox, but Tommy lingered near me, still carrying that worried expression that had become too familiar. "What if she writes something bad about us playing?" he asked quietly. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw how much this situation had stolen from his childhood. The carefree boy who used to cartwheel across the lawn had been replaced by someone who weighed the consequences of every action. Linda's words echoed in my mind again, about not trying to prove I was a good mother, but more than that, about not teaching my children to live in fear. "Tommy," I said, pulling him closer. "Do you remember what I used to tell you when you were learning to ride your bike? About being brave even when you're scared?" He nodded, some of the tension leaving his small shoulders. "Sometimes being brave means doing the right thing, even when someone is watching, even when someone might not like it. Playing in your own yard, being happy, being a kid. Those are all right things, and if someone has a problem with that, the problem is theirs, not yours." Jake had found his favorite dump truck in the sandbox and was already creating elaborate roadways, his earlier caution forgotten in the joy of play. His laughter carried across the yard, clear and infectious. Tommy watched his little brother for a moment, then looked back at me. "Can I get my soccer ball?" he asked, and I heard the first note of genuine excitement he'd shown in weeks. "Absolutely." As Tommy ran inside to retrieve his ball, I became acutely aware of Margaret's presence on her porch. She was writing something, her pen moving across the page with deliberate strokes. Part of me wanted to go inside, to avoid whatever interpretation she was placing on this perfectly normal afternoon. But a larger part of me, the part that was tired of walking on eggshells, stayed exactly where I was. Tommy emerged with his soccer ball, and within minutes, both boys were engaged in an impromptu game that involved more giggling than actual soccer skills. Jake abandoned his sandbox to chase after the ball, his little legs pumping as he tried to keep up with his older brother. The sound of their laughter filled our backyard, and for a moment, it felt like we were reclaiming something that had been stolen from us. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I saw Linda's name on the screen. "How are you holding up today?" I looked up at my boys, then over at Margaret, who was still scribbling in her notebook, then back at my phone. For the first time in months, I had something positive to report. "Better," I typed back. "We're outside playing. Margaret's watching and writing, but we're doing it anyway." Linda's response came quickly. "Good for you. How does it feel?" I considered the question as Jake tumbled over, trying to kick the ball, then popped up with grass stains on his knees and a huge grin on his face. Tommy helped him up, and they resumed their game without missing a beat. How did it feel to let my children be children, regardless of who was watching? "Scary," I typed back honestly. "But also right." Margaret stood up from her porch chair, notebook in hand, and for a moment I thought she might actually approach us. Instead, she walked to the edge of her porch, positioning herself for a better view. The deliberateness of her movements sent a familiar chill through me, but this time I didn't call the boys inside. This time, I stayed put. Tommy noticed Margaret's movement and glanced at me uncertainly. I could see him calculating, weighing whether he should tone down his play, modify his behavior to avoid drawing attention. It was a look no child should have to wear. "Keep playing," I told him firmly. "You're doing nothing wrong." But even as I said the words, I watched Margaret raise something in her hand, and with a sinking heart, I realized she was holding her phone. The afternoon sun caught the surface of Margaret's phone screen as she held it up, and I felt my stomach drop. She was recording us, recording my children playing in their own backyard. "Mom?" Tommy had stopped mid-kick, the ball rolling to a stop between his feet. He'd noticed, too. I forced my voice to remain steady, though my hands were trembling. "It's okay, sweetheart. Keep playing." But the magic of the afternoon had been punctured. Jake, oblivious to the tension, continued chasing the ball, but Tommy stood frozen, his eyes darting between me and Margaret. I could see him retreating into himself, that careful, watchful look settling over his features again. Margaret held the phone higher, making no attempt to hide what she was doing. If anything, she seemed to want us to know. There was something almost theatrical about the way she positioned herself, angling for the best shot of our yard. My phone buzzed again. Linda's text read, "Remember what we talked about? Document everything. Document everything." Right. With hands that felt clumsy and disconnected, I pulled up my own phone's camera and started recording Margaret recording us. If she wanted to play this game, at least I could create my own record of her behavior. "Tommy, why don't you show Jake how to dribble the ball?" I called out, my voice artificially bright. "Remember how you learned?" Tommy looked uncertain, but something in my expression must have convinced him. He jogged over to his little brother and demonstrated a simple move, his voice patient as he explained. Jake's delighted squeal when he managed to tap the ball forward sent a genuine smile across my face, even with Margaret's phone trained on us. I kept my own recording going, capturing Margaret's focused attention on my children. Every few seconds, she would lower the phone to write something in her notebook, then raise it again. The deliberateness of it was chilling. After about 10 minutes, Margaret finally lowered her phone and retreated inside her house. The boys continued playing for a while longer, but the easy joy from earlier was gone. Tommy kept glancing toward Margaret's house, and I found myself doing the same. When we finally went inside, Tommy lingered in the kitchen while Jake ran off to find his toy trucks. "Mom," he said quietly, "why was Mrs. Margaret taking pictures of us?" I knelt down to his level, my heart breaking at the worried crease between his eyebrows. "I don't know, buddy, but you weren't doing anything wrong. Playing in our yard is exactly what you should be doing." "Are we in trouble?" The question hit me like a physical blow. My 8-year-old shouldn't have to ask if playing soccer in his own backyard was going to get his family in trouble. "No," I said firmly. "We are not in trouble. Mrs. Margaret is—" I searched for words that wouldn't frighten him further. "Mrs. Margaret is confused about some things, but we're okay." That evening, after both boys were in bed, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the video I'd taken of Margaret. The image quality wasn't great, but it clearly showed her recording my children and taking notes. I'd also managed to capture the timestamp, proving when it happened. My phone rang, and Linda's name appeared on the screen. "Hey," I answered. "I've been thinking about what you texted earlier," she said without preamble. "About Margaret recording the boys. Did you get any of it on your own phone?" "Yeah, I got some video of her doing it." "Good, that's really good. Listen, I think it's time we took a more proactive approach." I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. "What do you mean?" "I mean, instead of just reacting to her reports, maybe we need to start building a case that shows a pattern of harassment." The word harassment hung in the air between us. It felt too big, too serious, even though part of me knew that's exactly what this was. "I don't know, Linda. What if it backfires? What if it makes things worse?" How much worse can they get? She's recording your children now, in their own yard. I walked to the window and peered through the blinds at Margaret's house. Most of the lights were off, but I could see the glow of what looked like a computer screen in one of the front windows. What if she's uploading those videos somewhere? I said, the thought occurring to me for the first time. Linda was quiet for a moment. All the more reason to act. Tomorrow, I think we should... The sentence was interrupted by a sharp knock at my front door. I froze, my grip tightening on the phone. Linda, someone's at my door. At this hour? It's almost 9:30. My heart hammered as I crept toward the front window, staying low and peering through the edge of the curtain. Margaret stood on my porch, clutching what looked like a manila folder against her chest. Even in the dim porch light, I could see her agitated posture. It's Margaret, I whispered into the phone. Don't answer it, Linda said immediately. Just wait her out. Margaret knocked again, harder this time. The sound seemed to echo through the house, and I prayed it wouldn't wake the boys. I know you're in there, Margaret called through the door, her voice carrying that same sharp edge I'd heard earlier in the yard. We need to talk. I backed away from the window, my pulse racing. She says she wants to talk. Nothing good comes from 9:30 p.m. confrontations, Linda said. Especially not with her. Margaret's voice came through the door again, louder now. I have documentation of what I witnessed today. The neglect, the unsafe conditions you're exposing those children to. My stomach dropped. The folder in her hands must contain whatever twisted narrative she'd constructed from watching my boys play soccer. Mom? Tommy's sleepy voice drifted from the top of the stairs. Who's at the door? I covered the phone's mouthpiece. Just someone selling something, honey. Go back to bed. But Margaret's next words carried clearly through the door and up the staircase. Those boys deserve better than a mother who ignores them while they play unsupervised in dangerous conditions. Tommy appeared at the top of the stairs in his pajamas, his face pale and confused. Is she talking about us? The knocking came again, more insistent now. I could hear Margaret muttering something about responsibility and proper documentation. Linda? I whispered urgently. Tommy heard her. He's asking questions. Get him away from there. This is harassment, pure and simple. I motioned for Tommy to come downstairs, wrapping my arm around him when he reached me. His small body was tense, and I could feel him trembling slightly. Mrs. Margaret seems very angry, he whispered. Through the door, Margaret's voice rose again. I have photographs, timestamps, detailed observations. The authorities will want to see everything. Tommy looked up at me with wide, frightened eyes. What photographs? The weight of what Margaret was doing hit me fully. She wasn't just making false reports anymore. She was actively documenting my children's normal activities and twisting them into evidence of neglect. And now she was standing on my porch at night, frightening my son with her accusations. Linda, I said into the phone, my voice steadier than I felt. I think you're right. We need to do something about this. The silence after Margaret's final threat stretched like a taut wire. I stood there with Tommy pressed against my side, feeling the weight of every decision I'd avoided making over the past few weeks. This woman had escalated from anonymous phone calls to standing on my porch at night, terrifying my child with her twisted version of reality. Linda, I need to call you back, I said quietly into the phone. Are you sure? I can stay on the line while she's out there. No, I think I know what I need to do now. After hanging up, I knelt down to Tommy's level, my hands gentle on his shoulders. His eyes were still wide with confusion and fear, and seeing him like this crystallized something inside me. Margaret's harassment had crossed a line I should never have let her approach. "Tommy, Mrs. Margaret is confused about some things," I said carefully. "She thinks she saw something today that worried her, but she's wrong. You and Jake weren't doing anything dangerous when you were playing soccer." "But she said she has pictures," Tommy whispered. "What if she shows them to people and they believe her?" The innocence in his question broke my heart. Here was my responsible, thoughtful 10-year-old worrying about adult problems he shouldn't even know existed. I'd been so focused on trying to handle Margaret diplomatically that I'd failed to protect my children from the anxiety her actions were causing. "Honey, sometimes adults make mistakes too," I said. "Mrs. Margaret has been making a lot of mistakes lately about our family. But I'm going to fix this, okay? You don't need to worry about it anymore." The knocking had stopped, but I could still see Margaret's silhouette through the frosted glass panel beside the door. She seemed to be writing something, probably adding tonight's refusal to cooperate to whatever documentation she was compiling. I helped Tommy back upstairs, tucking him into bed and reassuring him until his breathing deepened into sleep. When I came back downstairs, Margaret was gone, but she'd left something wedged into the doorframe. I opened the door just enough to retrieve it, a handwritten note detailing her observations from today, complete with timestamps and what she called photographic evidence of neglect. Reading her words, I felt a strange mix of anger and clarity. She documented Jake and Tommy playing soccer in our backyard, describing it as unsupervised children engaging in potentially dangerous physical activity. She'd noted that I was nowhere to be seen during a 15-minute window when I'd gone inside to start dinner. She'd even taken pictures of their dirty clothes and grass stains, labeling them as evidence of poor hygiene maintenance. Every normal moment of childhood play had been twisted into something sinister through her lens, but seeing it all written out so starkly, I realized something important. Anyone reasonable would see this for exactly what it was: the obsessive documentation of completely normal parenting and childhood activities. I called Linda back, and when she answered, my voice was steadier than it had been in weeks. "I read her note," I said. "Linda, she photographed my kids playing soccer and called it neglect. She timed how long I was inside making dinner and called it abandonment." "That's actually good news," Linda said immediately. "I know it doesn't feel like it, but this level of detail works in your favor. No reasonable person would look at kids playing in their own backyard and see neglect. I keep thinking about what you said, about documentation. I've been so busy defending myself that I haven't been building my own case. It's not too late to start. What matters now is how you move forward." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea, thinking about the past few weeks from a different angle. I'd been reactive, always responding to Margaret's latest accusation or complaint. I'd been so afraid of escalating the situation that I'd given her more and more power over my family's daily life. But tonight, watching Tommy's frightened face, something had shifted in my perspective. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was protecting my children from an adult who was actively trying to disrupt their sense of safety and normalcy. That responsibility felt clearer and more urgent than any desire to keep the peace. The next morning, Jake bounded downstairs full of energy, chattering about wanting to practice soccer again today. Tommy was quieter, picking at his cereal and glancing toward the window that faced Margaret's house. "Can we play outside today?" Jake asked. "I want to work on my corner kicks." Tommy looked at me uncertainly. "Is it okay if we do that?" The hesitation in Tommy's voice, The way he was asking permission for something that should be automatic made my decision final. My children shouldn't have to second-guess their right to play in their own yard because a neighbor had decided to weaponize normal childhood activities. Of course you can play outside, I said firmly. This is your home, and that's your backyard. You can play soccer whenever you want. But even as I said it, I found myself mentally noting the time, thinking about how I could document their supervised play, already calculating how to defend activities that needed no defense. Margaret's harassment had gotten so deep into my head that I was viewing my own parenting through her distorted lens. That realization was perhaps the most disturbing part of this entire situation. She hadn't just been making false reports. She'd been gradually eroding my confidence in my own judgment, making me question decisions I'd never doubted before.